If you love the whole cottagecore aesthetic, as I clearly do, in a non-trad wifey kind of way, then you probably have stumbled across Anne of Green Gables by L.M. Montgomery. Unfortunately, a lot of tradwives have claimed this text. It is so ironic because Anne of Green Gables is extremely feminist, and not only is Anne of Green Gables feminist, but it's also really queer. In this video essay, I, Ella Orchard-Bowen, will be close reading Anne of Green Gables by L.M. Montgomery, and I will be analyzing the queer themes within this text, specifically the relationship between Diana Barry and Anne Shirley. Thank you so much for joining me on this exploration of literature and queerness. You're feeling very cottagecore-y, very cottagecore fall. Also, I am, of course, wearing a themed outfit because I always do this for my video essays. I always try to wear an outfit that, matches the vibe of whatever literature or whatever media I'm discussing. Whether that's, emulating a character or just emulating the vibe. So today I'm very cottagecore. I'll do a little fit check. Yay! Very cottagecore. Getting into the queerness within this book, I think it's important to first explain what the book is even about. Anne of Green Gables tells the story of Anne Shirley, a young orphan girl who is accidentally adopted by siblings Marilla and Matthew Cuthbert. Anne lives with the Cuthberts on Prince Edward Island in Canada in a fictional town called Avonlea, and the land that the Cuthberts own is called Green Gables, hence the title Anne of Green Gables. The first book in the series, Anne of Green Gables, follows Anne as she adjusts to her new life at Green Gables and as she makes connections within her community of Avonlea. It's coming of age, it's girlhood, it's cottagecore, it's feminist, it's queer. Anne of Green Gables was originally published in 1908 and has since been considered a classic within children's literature. You can see I have a pretty edition of Anne of Green Gables. I also just recently thrifted a non-pretty edition. There have been several adaptations made of the story, from film to TV shows to plays to an anime, along with a multitude of sequels written by Montgomery. I will be including clips from the 1985 CBC television film of the same name and the 2017 television series, Anne with an E. As you can see, Anne of Green Gables has left a lasting impact in a multitude of ways. A more in-depth exploration of the story of Anne of Green Gables and how Anne of Green Gables is feminist, then I highly recommend watching my video essay, Is Anne of Green Gables Feminist? Little self-promo. That's kind of biased. There's so many great video essays about Anne of Green Gables, but I am very proud of that one that I did last year. As you can tell, Anne of Green Gables is one of my favorite books, and it means a lot to me. I'm not going to do a full breakdown of the entire text in this video essay, because then we would be here for hours. I'm also only covering this first book. I don't own any of the sequels yet. I'm also not going in depth into every single thing in this book because that's a decent amount of pages and we don't have forever. So instead, I'm going to focus on the major plot points that specifically relate to the queer themes present within the text. In this video essay, I'm going to be utilizing a queer theory literary lens when examining Anne of Green Gables. But what is a queer theory literary lens? The Indiana University Bloomington Library Online has a multitude of research guides, and they have one on queer theory. The Indiana University Bloomington Library defines queer theory as: Queer theory is a field that encourages one to look at the world through new avenues. It is a way of thinking that dismantles traditional assumptions about gender and sexual identities, challenges traditional academic approaches, and fights against social inequality. For many academics, queer theory provides a lens through which they can queer ideas and work in their own disciplines. In this way, queering is not always about imposing queerness on an area, but about utilizing the lenses of queer theory to imagine new, previously unidentified possibilities. I'm going to be queering Anne of Green Gables. And by that, I mean I'm going to be examining the characters from Anne of Green Gables from a queer viewpoint and analyzing interactions between characters for any queerness. That might sound a bit confusing, but essentially I'm going to be using my experience as a bisexual woman when reading Anne of Green Gables. And I'm going to be looking for any characters who may remind me of my own queer experiences, or who may just seem queer to me. There's long been this belief within the literary world and also within the historical world, within the humanities, that terms like queer or even more explicit identities like gay, lesbian, bisexual, or transgender shouldn't be used to describe older historical figures or older literature. Those terms shouldn't be put on figures from history such as Emily Dickinson, and also those labels or words shouldn't be used to label characters from fiction, older fiction, you know what I mean? We shouldn't be calling Jo March from Little Women a lesbian. Actually, people are saying that we shouldn't use modern terms such as lesbian, bisexual, transgender, gay to describe literature or historical figures from a certain time, because they didn't have access to those words or these terms or identities. So therefore, we shouldn't be putting them on them. It's very complex, but I'm just giving a brief overview of this argument just because I'm going to combat it. Honestly, this argument could be covered in a whole other video essay, but I just want to briefly acknowledge it here because I'm going to go against it. And I just want to acknowledge that I believe we should use terms like queer or gay or lesbian or bisexual or transgender because LGBTQ plus people have always existed and we will always exist, even if you erase us. And this is a direct call out to what is occurring in the United States of America right now with the fascist regime that is happening and the way that queer identities have already been erased and are probably only going to continue to be. You can take away those words and you can take away those identities and our rights, but we will always be here. We have always been here and we will always be here. And yeah, that's all I'm going to say about that. I mean, and even if in the past people didn't have these words to describe themselves or their experiences or to identify as, it doesn't mean that we can't use them now, because honestly, it makes things more accessible, right? So in this video essay, I will be labeling characters as queer or bisexual, or lesbian, whatever. I will be using those words, even if at the time that Anne of Green Gables was originally published, those words, specifically the word queer, meant something different. But now let's get into the text of Anne of Green Gables. Take me to the lakes where all the poets went. Anne Shirley first appears in Chapter 2 of Anne of Green Gables. She is patiently awaiting her new family to pick her up from the train station in Avonlea. When Matthew Cuthbert arrives to pick her up, he is shocked because he and his sister Marilla had intended to adopt a boy to help them on their farm. If you're curious about that whole dynamic, again, I recommend watching my other video essay on Anne of Green Gables. Matthew is unsure of what to do with Anne, but he ultimately brings her home to Green Gables and Marilla. As they ride in the carriage back to Green Gables, Anne bombards Matthew with questions, along with just yapping. She yaps a lot. She's a yapper. As they ride in the carriage, Matthew interrupts Anne's stream of consciousness to point out a few landmarks. She also asks him what certain landmarks are. He specifically points out Mr. Barry's house.
Here's Barry's, Pon.
I don't like that name either.
Anne immediately asks Matthew if Mr. Barry has any daughters. Has Mr. Barry any little girls? Well, not so very little either, about my size. Anne asks this question because she wants to know if any girls around her age live near Green Gables, because she desperately wants a friend, specifically a friend who is a girl and her age. Matthew responds to her and tells her that he's got one about 11. Her name is Diana. Anne is immediately excited because Anne herself is 11, so her and Diana are the same age, and also because of her desperation for a girl space friend. This is the first time Diana Barry is mentioned in Anne of Green Gables. Usually after some turmoil, the Cuthberts decide to keep Anne and to raise her as their own. Anne begins to adjust to life in Avonlea and at Green Gables. In chapter 8 of the book, Diana Barry is brought up again. Anne asks Marilla, "Do you think that I shall ever have a bosom friend in Avonlea?" Marilla is unsure of how to respond. A what kind of friend? Anne explains what she means to Marilla. A bosom friend, an intimate friend. You know, a really kindred spirit to whom I can confide my inmost soul. I've dreamed of meeting her all my life. I never really supposed I would, but so many of my loveliest dreams have come true all at once that perhaps this one will too. Do you think it's possible? This whole monologue is so deeply queer to me. I mean, the whole term bosom friend is inherently queer, in my opinion. At least to me. Which is why Marilla probably reacts the way that she does to Anne saying bosom friend, because she's like, whoa, what? I'm now going to define bosom friend, because yeah, Anne defines it in the book, but I'm going to just define it here as well. Bosom friend, as defined by the Oxford English Dictionary, is a specially intimate or beloved friend. Anne is longing for a close, special friend. And I think it's important to point out that Anne uses the pronouns she and her when discussing the potential bosom friend. Obviously, I'm not trying to negate the importance of close girlhood friendships. I have many of those, treasure those friendships, and I think that Anne also grows to have those, but her dynamic with Anna, who does become her bosom friend, is very, very different than her dynamic with her other really close space friends. But I think the way that Anne speaks of her dream of wanting a bosom friend is very queer. I mean, come on, saying I've dreamed of meeting her all my life, that's gay.
You are gay!
Anne is 11, so she's still young, but I think her desperation for a close girlfriend is very reminiscent of my experience as a young queer girl. But going back to the text, Diana Barry is brought up once again. Diana Barry lives over at Orchard Slope, and she's about your age. She's a very nice little girl, and perhaps she will be a playmate for you when she comes home. She's visiting her aunt over at Carmody just now. You'll have to be careful how you behave yourself, though. Mrs. Barry is a very particular woman. She won't let Diana play with any little girl who isn't nice and good.
Diana Barry lives over there on Orchard Slope. You can meet her.
I feel as if this response adds to the queerness. Marilla seems to be hinting that Mrs. Barry may not be accepting of Anne. Anne is viewed by those in Avonlea as an odd girl, someone who goes against the norm, which in my opinion, this type of character is typically queer. Marilla could almost be hinting to Anne that she didn't let Mrs. Barry know that she is queer because Mrs. Barry wouldn't be accepting. Anne then goes on to ask Marilla questions about Diana. What is Diana like? Her hair isn't red, is it? Oh, I hope not. It's bad enough to have red hair myself, but I positively couldn't endure it in a bosom friend. Diana is a very pretty little girl. She has black eyes and hair and rosy cheeks, and she is good and smart, which is better than being pretty. I think it's important to note how Anne asked Marilla about Diana's appearance. Anne is very self-conscious of her own appearance, especially her red hair, because she believes that it makes her ugly. Anne can be a bit superficial, but then again, what 11-year-old girl isn't? I mean, society and culture encourages young girls to care so deeply about our appearances. But Anne also cares about what Diana looks like, and I think it's interesting how she hopes that Diana doesn't have red hair. Anne responds to Marilla, "Oh, I'm so glad she's pretty. Next to being beautiful oneself, and that's impossible in my case, it would be best to have a beautiful bosom friend." Again, I think it's interesting how deeply Anne cares about whether or not Diana is beautiful. Anne then goes on to tell Marilla about how at her previous home that she lived at prior to the Cuthberts, she used to have this imaginary friend of sorts. When I lived with Mrs. Thomas, she had a bookcase in her sitting room with glass doors. There weren't any books in it. Mrs. Thomas kept her best china and her preserves there. One of the doors was broken, but the other was whole, and I used to pretend that my reflection in it was another little girl who lived in it. I called her Katie Maurice, and we were very intimate. Note the word intimate there. Anne's whole relationship with her imaginary friend Katie Maurice is also very queer and shows Anne's repeated pattern for longing for close female friendships and close female relationships. She also has another imaginary friend too at the next home that she lives at. She lives with Mrs. Thomas, and then she lives with another family, and then she goes and lives with the Cuthberts. And I think she maybe lives in an orphanage or something in between then, but Yeah, she was basically like a live-in servant for other families. Anne goes on and on about Katie Maurice to Marilla, concluding with, "When I went to live with Mrs. Hammond, it just broke my heart to leave Katie Maurice. She felt it dreadfully too. I know she did, for she was crying when she kissed me goodbye through the bookcase door." Obviously, Katie Maurice is like not a real person. It's Anne's imaginary friend that she has, but it is noticeable how she says we were intimate, how she says like she was distraught to leave her. She kissed her through the bookcase door or bookcase window, glass door thing. Obviously, it's like literally just her reflection, but I do think this is significant to point out. Marilla then tells Anne to not mention her imaginary friends to Mrs. Barry when she meets them. Anne eventually goes up to her room and she talks to the tree outside of her bedroom window. "I wonder if Diana is to be my bosom friend. I hope she will, and I shall love her very much." Again, the word love there. And just her longing, her yearning for Diana to be her bosom friend. She hasn't even met Diana yet. She knows about Diana through Matthew and Marilla, but she's yearning for her. Again, I feel as if Anne's obsession with having a bosom friend is very queer. She longs to have a relationship with a girl her age that she can share her most intimate moments with. Anne's continued yearning for female companionship only grows stronger the longer she lives in Avonlea. In Chapter 11, Anne goes to church and Sunday school alone, wearing one of Marilla's old dresses. But along the way, Anne picks a bunch of flowers and decorates her hat with the flowers because she was like, wow, my outfit's really boring, my hat's really boring, I have to wear Marilla's old clothes, so then she like decorates herself with the flowers. Flower-adorned hat makes the other girls at Sunday school judge Anne. In the porch, she found a crowd of little girls, all more or less gaily attired in whites and blues and pinks, and all staring with curious eyes at this stranger in their midst, with her extraordinary head adornment. Avonlea little girls had already heard queer stories about Anne. I'd like to acknowledge that the word queer here is not in reference to Anne's sexuality, but instead about her personality. To quote Merriam-Webster, queer means differing in some way from what is usual or normal, odd, strange, weird. But even though the word queer here isn't being used to describe Anne's sexuality, I still feel as if it adds to the queerness of the character of Anne Shirley. Because Anne is an outcast with other young girls her age, she's odd and weird to them. She doesn't fit in, which definitely fuels her obsession with finding a bosom friend she can fit in with, someone who is like her. I feel as if being an outcast is a common motif within stories of queer youth because queer people have been marginalized for centuries. They are often made to feel as if society won't accept them and they are shoved into the outcast role. In Chapter 12, Anne finally meets Diana, and her obsession for a bosom friend only intensifies. When Marilla informs Anne that Diana has returned home from her aunt's house and that Marilla is willing to bring Anne over to the Barrys so that Anne can meet Diana, Anne immediately begins to worry about whether or not Diana will like her. "Oh, Marilla, I'm frightened. Now that it has come, I'm actually frightened. What if she shouldn't like me? It would be the most tragical disappointment of my life." And
Whatever's the matter with you, child? You haven't said a word since we left. You're not yourself.
Perfect.
desperation for Diana to be her bosom friend is on full display here. Anne has seemingly hyped up this meeting with Diana so much in her own head, and she seems to have established an almost parasocial crush on Diana, in my opinion. Marilla and Anne make their way over to the Barrys, and Anne and Diana finally meet. The two girls go out to the garden at the Barrys' house, and things are a bit awkward at first. Stood Anne and Diana gazing bashfully at each other over a clump of gorgeous tiger lilies. This awkward first meeting reminds me of times where I have met someone that I've hyped up in my head, like one that you have kind of like a parasocial relationship with, and then you actually meet them, and it's like, oh, how do I speak to you? Like when you've built up this person in your imagination and they become this almost fictional character to you, and then you finally meet them, it's bound to be awkward. But Anne finally breaks the tension. "Oh, Diana," said Anne at last, clasping her hands and speaking almost in a whisper. "Oh, do you think you can like me a little? Enough to be my bosom friend?" Of course, Anne's boldness in outright asking Diana if she'll be her bosom friend makes me cringe in embarrassment for her, especially when watching it happen, the show or the film.
Diana, do you think you could like me? Just a little? I already do. Shall we swear to be best friends forever and ever?
It is sweet, and it's a great reminder of how young Anne is, because, she's so young, she's 11, she's impulsive. Like, what 11-year-old isn't impulsive with their words, right? Luckily, Diana doesn't judge her for her boldness. Instead, this is the moment that Diana accepts Anne for who she is. Anne is a very bold, almost impulsive young girl who often speaks before she thinks. I can appreciate her character very much because I heavily relate to her in this way. Not everyone in Avonlea is accepting of Anne and her oddities, but Diana is immediately accepting of Anne upon meeting her, which is really beautiful in my opinion. After Anne asks Diana if she'll be her bosom friend, Diana doesn't make fun of Anne. Instead, she responds with, "Why, I guess so," she said frankly. "I'm awfully glad you've come to live at Green Gables. It will be jolly to have somebody to play with. There isn't any other girl who lives near enough to play with, and I've no sisters big enough." How Diana doesn't even question what Anne means with the term bosom friends. She just accepts it and agrees. Two girls were raised extremely differently, with Anne being an orphan and not having a stable home to grow up in prior to moving to Green Gables. Whereas Diana grew up in a very stable home with a mother and father and a younger sister. It also, it's easy to infer that Diana comes from money, and it's not as if, the Cuthberts do not have money. The Cuthberts definitely do have money, but the Barrys definitely are well-to-do. Diana has been raised to be a proper lady and has these expectations put upon her. In a contrasting way to the way that Anne has been raised, and then the way that Anne is then raised by the Cuthberts. In many ways, Diana and Anne are very much opposites, but yet instead of shunning Anne, Diana immediately accepts her for who she is. Their differences continue to be highlighted throughout the rest of the scene.
It's dreadfully wicked to swear. No, it's not my kind of swearing. There are two kinds. I know because I have a worldly outlook. This kind isn't wicked at all. It means vowing and promising solemnly. I swear it does. See? How do you do it?
"Will you swear to be my friend forever and ever?" demanded Anne eagerly. Diana looked shocked. "Why, it's dreadfully wicked to swear," she said. "Oh no, not my kind of swearing. There are two kinds, you know." "I never heard of but one kind," said Diana doubtfully. "There really is another." "Oh, it isn't wicked at all. It just means vowing and promising solemnly." "Well, I don't mind doing that," agreed Diana, relieved. "How do you do it?" I think this whole scene between the two of them is so sweet and really highlights how, despite their differences, their connection is genuine and real. Finally, Anne and Diana promise to be bosom friends. "We must join hands so," said Anne gravely. "Ought to be over running water. We'll just imagine this path is running water. I'll repeat the oath first. I solemnly swear to be faithful to my bosom friend, Diana Barry, as long as the sun and moon shall endure. Now you say it and put my name in." Diana.
Well, this ought to be done by moonlight or over running water, but we'll just imagine that it's nighttime and this path is a stream. Hold this and twist your pinky finger around mine. I'll repeat the oath first. I solemnly swear
to be faithful to my bosom friend Diana Barry for as long as the sun and moon shall endure.
Diana does what Anne says, and then she says to Anne, "You're a queer girl, Anne. I heard before that you were queer, but I believe I'm going to like you real well." I love this line that Diana says because it's yet again another example of Diana accepting Anne for who she is. She's heard these stories about Anne being queer, being odd, being different, and yet she just accepts her. And she's like, "No, but we're still going to be best friends." Rumors of Anne being queer and odd have been spread throughout Avonlea, and Diana is admitting that she has heard these rumors. But despite those rumors, Diana still wants to be best friends with Anne. After becoming bosom friends, Diana and Anne go back to the Barry house, and because they were in the garden, and Marilla and Anne leave to go home. As they walk home, Anne tells Marilla about all the plans that Anne and Diana have made together already. "She's going to show me a place back in the woods where rice lilies grow. Don't you think Diana has got very soulful eyes?" I think it's important to highlight how Anne specifically mentions lilies here, and that Diana is bringing her to see these lilies. Lilies have a long history of being a queer flower, a secret symbol of queerness. Meg Blancato outlines in the article the symbolism and history of rainbow flowers for the LGBTQ+ community. Lilies, too, hold significance within the LGBTQ+ community. Georgia O'Keeffe's floral paintings, her paintings of calla lilies were often interpreted as intimate imitations of female genitalia, which were adopted as an erotic lesbian symbol. I don't think that there's inherently erotic tension between Anne and Diana at this moment in the book because they are 11. Who knows whether or not Montgomery wrote this line about lilies to hint at Anne and Diana's potential romantic relationship, but I do think it's interesting to point the potential symbolism behind lilies. But back to the text. Anne and Diana are now established bosom friends. In the next chapter, Anne is yapping to Marilla again and tells Marilla about her and Diana's playhouse. And right in the corner, there is a little ring of white birch trees, the most romantic spot, Marilla. Diana and I have our playhouse there. Anne and Diana's playhouse is in the woods, and they are essentially playing house together out there. Obviously, yes, this can be analyzed as just two young girls playing together, but I just feel like given the context of their dynamic, this might mean a little more. Again, they are 11, but like it is sweet and romantic and special, and specifically uses the word romantic here. Not be romantic explicitly yet because they are young, they're 11, but I do think Anne has an innocent childhood crush on Diana during this era, and Diana also has a crush on Anne as well. Skipping ahead a bit, Anne starts attending school in the same schoolhouse in Avonlea as Diana and all the other kids in Avonlea. Diana and Anne walk together to school every day, and they take a long scenic route together to get there. The way Anne and Diana went to school was a pretty one. Anne thought those walks to and from school with Diana couldn't be improved upon even by imagination. Going around by the main road would have been so unromantic, but to go by Lover's Lane and Willowmere and Violet Vale and the Birch Path was romantic. If ever anything was.
Gilbert told Charlie Sloane that you were the smartest girl.
I want to point out that Anne has a big imagination, and she renames everything in Avonlea, coming up with more creative, beautiful names for everything. She names Lover's Lane, which is the lane that Diana and her walk on together to get to school, and she specifically thinks about how romantic the walk with Diana is. Anne tells Marilla all about the walk that her and Diana take together every day, and Anne specifically mentions Violet Vale. Of course, there are no violets there now, Anne told Marilla, but Diana says there are millions of them in the spring. Going back to the queer flowers concept, violets are also deemed a queer flower. As explained in Queer Botany, the Sapphic Violet, violets have a long history being used to symbolize queer love, dating back to Sappho. Sappho wrote many poems featuring violets. We only have excerpts from Sappho's poetry because many of Sappho's work was destroyed by evil people. The article states violets have gone on to be associated with lesbianism and referred to as the lesbian flower. So violets are also a queer flower. So there's symbolism behind that. So again, I think it's interesting that Anne specifically references violets in relation to Diana. Marilla is at first scared when sending Anne off to school because she fears that the other kids will be rude to Anne. First, Anne loves school and tells Marilla all about her classmates and what school is like. Again, if you want a more in-depth analysis of the other students in Anne's class, I highly recommend watching my other Anne of Green Gables video essay. But Anne tells Marilla that Diana is her favorite in the class. There are a lot of nice girls in school, and we have scrumptious fun playing at dinner time. It's so nice to have a lot of little girls to play with. Of course, I like Diana best, and I always will. I adore Diana. Anne goes on to form close friendships with the other girls in the schoolhouse, and they kind of form like a little girl group with... But as she states to Marilla, Diana remains Anne's favorite forever, and their relationship is very different. I hope I have made it clear so far in this video essay that I believe Anne Shirley to be queer, and I believe that Anne and Diana's relationship has some queer undertones to it, and I also believe that Diana Barry is queer as well. But that doesn't mean I'm going to negate Gilbert Blythe. Diana is the one who first mentions Gilbert to Anne. I guess Gilbert Blythe will be in school today, said Diana. He's been visiting his cousins over New Brunswick all summer. He only came home Saturday night. He's awfully handsome, Anne. And he teases the girls something terrible. He just torments our lives out. Anne then asked Diana if this Gilbert is the same Gilbert whose name is up on the take notice board at their schoolhouse. The take notice board is where girls and boys' names are written up, either by like the girl or the boy or by their classmates. And it's like essentially just like either their classmates shipping them or either the girl or the boy shipping themselves with the other one, saying that they like each other, like silly little crush things. Very heteronormative though, because it's only girls and boys.
To the take notice board with the post about me. This is so exciting. Isn't that scandalous?
Criticizes the extremely heteronormative take notice board, which I think is significant. I do think that writing take notices up on the wall about the boys and girls is the silliest ever. I should just like to see anybody dare to write my name up with the boys. Not, of course, she hastened to add, that anybody would. Anne sighed. She didn't want her name written up, but it was a little humiliating to know that there was no danger of it. Notice how Anne specifically says my name up with the boys. She says nothing about a girl's name being written up with hers. Obviously, this probably wouldn't have been acceptable in the 19th century, but I feel as if this comment only fuels the Anne is queer narrative. I'm going to kind of skip over the whole Gilbert and Anne storyline, but I'm going to briefly mention him in this video essay. I do love their romance, and I believe that Anne is still queer even though she ends up with Gilbert. I don't think her ending up with Gilbert negates her queerness, because her romance with Diana is valid, just as her romance with Gilbert is valid. Skipping ahead, there's a lot of drama within the schoolhouse, and Anne's teacher, Mr. Phillips, is low-key, high-key an asshole. One time, the students were outside hanging out before Mr. Phillips arrived at the schoolhouse, and Anne accidentally gets caught up in the chaos of the boys in the class, and Mr. Phillips punishes her. "Anne Shirley, since you seem to be so fond of the boys' company, we shall indulge your taste for it this afternoon," he said sarcastically. "Take those flowers out of your hair and sit with Gilbert Blythe." I think that is so interesting that Anne's punishment is that she has to sit next to a boy. Again, feels very queer undertony to me. But essentially, this all causes Anne to want to stop attending school. But Anne not wanting to attend school anymore devastates Diana. "I'm not coming back to school anymore," said Anne. Diana gasped and stared at Anne to see if she meant it. "I'd do almost anything in the world for you, Diana," said Anne sadly. "Let myself be torn limb from limb if it would do you any good, but I can't do this, so please don't ask it. You harrow up my very soul." This is very overdramatic, of course, because Anne can be very overdramatic at times, but also very sweet and very romantic. And things only get more queer as Anne stays home from school and she's alone with her thoughts. One day, Marilla walks in and sees Anne crying. Whatever's the matter now, Anne?" she asked. "It's about Diana," sobbed Anne luxuriously. "I love Diana so, Marilla. I cannot ever live without her. But I know very well when we grow up that Diana will get married and go away and leave me. And oh, what shall I do? I hate her husband. I just hate him furiously. I've been imagining it all out, the wedding and everything." In my opinion, this whole monologue by Anne is the strongest piece of evidence in my argument that Anne is queer. Anne and Diana are only 11 and have quite a few years, it's the 19th century, before marriage, and yet Anne is already distraught over the idea of her bosom friend leaving her for a man. Anne finally gets to see Diana again when she invites her over to tea, and this is when Anne accidentally serves them both red currant wine instead of raspberry cordial. The girls both get drunk, and Anne tells Diana of a story that she made up in her head. "I was thinking of the loveliest story about you and me, Diana. I thought you were desperately ill with smallpox, and everybody deserted you, but I went boldly to your bedside and nursed you back to life. And then I took the smallpox and died, buried under those poplar trees in the graveyard, and you planted a rose bush by my grave and watered it with your tears, and you never, never forgot the friend of your youth who sacrificed her life for you."
Thinking of a lovely story about us, Diana. I imagined you were desperately ill with smallpox. When everyone deserted you, I went boldly to your bedside and nursed you back to life. But then I took smallpox and died. And you planted a rose bush by my grave and watered it with your tears. You never, ever forgot the friend of your youth who sacrificed her life for yours.
I feel as if this whole tale that Anne comes up with is also extremely queer. Anne's sacrificing her own health to save Diana and dying for her. It's a very tragic queer romance. However, when Mrs. Barry finds out that Anne gave her daughter alcohol, she bans Diana from seeing Anne. This distresses both Anne and Diana. Anne admits to Marilla, "My heart is broken. The stars in their courses fight against me, Marilla. Diana and I are parted forever." Of course, this is devastating, and Anne saying her heart is broken inherently implies romance, in my opinion. Obviously, your heart can be broken over like a friendship breakup, but I just feel like the way that she speaks about Diana is more than a friendship. In the next chapter, Diana seeks out Anne to say a goodbye of sorts, and they share a tender romantic moment. "Oh, Diana, will you promise faithfully never to forget me, the friend of your youth, no matter what dealer friend may caress thee?" "Indeed I will," sobbed Diana, "and I'll never have another bosom friend. I don't want to have. I couldn't love anybody as I love you." "Oh, Diana," cried Anne, clasping her hands, "do you love me?" "Why, of course I do. Didn't you know that?" "No," Anne drew a long breath. "I thought you liked me, of course, but I never hoped you loved me. Why, Diana, I didn't think anybody could love me. Nobody ever has loved me since I can remember. Oh, this is wonderful. It's a ray of light which forever shine the darkness of a path severed from thee, Diana. Oh, just say it once again." "I love you devotedly, Anne," said Diana staunchly. "I always will. You may be sure of that, and I will always love thee, Diana.
Diana, will you promise never to forget me, no matter what other friends come into your life? I could never love anybody as much as I love you, Anne. Do you really love me? Of course I do. Nobody's ever loved me for as long as I can remember, except for Matthew and Marilla. Solemnly swear to remain faithful to my bosom friend Diana Barry for as long as the sun and the moon shall endure. Remain faithful to my bosom friend Anne Shirley for as long as the sun and moon shall endure. I have to go.
This whole interaction between these two girls is so queer to me and solidifies their queer relationship as they finally admit their love to each other. However, this is also essentially their breakup because they're no longer allowed to be together. Anne ultimately decides to go back to school, and although Diana and her aren't allowed to interact, they do pass notes in school. Anne longs for her bosom friend, though, and then one day, Diana shows up at Green Gables, and Anne is so happy to see her. Diana is visibly distraught and tells Anne that her younger sister, Minnie May, is sick. Mr. and Mrs. Barry are out of town, in another town nearby, so Diana doesn't know who to go to. There's no, adults or anything. But luckily, Anne knows how to help sick children because she had previously been in charge of caring for children at some of her previous homes when she was a live-in servant.
Oh, Anne! She's fearful sick. She can scarcely breathe. I need to fetch the ipecac before we go. Matthew won't be back for hours. I will do everything I can until then. I've missed you so much. I've missed you too.
So Anne goes with Diana to the Barry house and she nurses Minnie May back to health. Because of this, Mrs. Barry decides to forgive Anne and she allows Diana once again to spend time with Anne. Diana and Anne get to hang out again. Romance is back on. Diana stood at the window and threw kisses to me all the way down to Lover's Lane. Anne and Diana then set up a signal system to communicate from their two homes using candles and cardboard, which in my opinion is also romantic. They're sending each other secret mysterious messages that Anne and Diana then go on to have a lot of fun adventures in Anne of Green Gables. But if I were to dive deep into each and every single one of them, we would be here for ages. As the book goes on and the girls grow up, they both turn 12 and then 13 and then 14. And then it comes time for serious talks of the future. And as Anne explains to Marilla, young men are all very well in their place, but it doesn't do to drag them into everything, does it? Anna and I are thinking seriously of promising each other that we will never marry, but be nice old maids and live together forever.
Josephine never married. Neither of them did. They lived with each other their whole lives.
I'd live with you forever if I could.
To me, this is the perfect conclusion to their romance. There are other events that occur after this, but this is the last big Anne and Diana moment, and also this script is 15 pages long. Conclusion of them both being we're not going to get married to men. We don't need men. All we need is each other, and we're just going to live together and grow old together and just live together, the two of us. That's queer. I would argue that Anne Shirley is bisexual based on all the context I have provided in this video essay. I don't think that is a wild conclusion, especially based on her relationship with Diana Barry. I'd also argue that Anne and Diana are in a romantic relationship in Anne of Green Gables. That doesn't take away from Anne's relationship with Gilbert because in my opinion, Anne can still like both of them if she's bisexual. Maybe I'm projecting my own bisexuality onto her, but I can't help but view her experiences as bisexual, especially the way that she talks about Diana and yearns for Diana when they are young, when they're 11, and that childlike crush that she seems to have on Diana, because I have had similar experiences to that. So again, maybe I'm projecting, but still. When Anne and Gilbert do officially get together, it isn't until later in the book series. They don't even get together in this. Will say, I do love Anne and Gilbert. I also love Anne and Diana. Those can both be valid relationships for Anne. The point that Anne and Gilbert do get together, Anne is at a different school than Diana, and they're still close and they're still bosom friends, but they kind of have drifted, remain close and special to each other throughout the rest of the book series. But there definitely is kind of a shift and a dynamic change once Anne kind of goes off to a different school and Diana is married and all of that. They kind of go down different life paths. All of that being said, Anne of Green Gables is queer literature. because of the way that L.M. Montgomery portrays the characters of Anne Shirley and Diana Barry and their relationship. I'm also not the only person who thinks Anne of Green Gables is queer. There have been many debates over whether or not Anne of Green Gables is queer for a really long time. In 2004, Laura Robinson published the article Bosom Friends, Lesbian Desire, L.M. Montgomery's Anne Books. In this article, Robinson explores how Anne of Green Gables is potentially queer literature and how the books highlight compulsory heterosexuality. Caamp. To quote Robinson directly, first, Anne displays an unbearable longing or desire for her friend. Then some obstacle obscures the path of their love. The obstacle is finally overcome, only to have compulsory heterosexuality intervene. I don't agree with everything Robinson says in this article. I agreed that there is Caamp present within Anne of Green Gables. However, I think that Anne subverts Caamp a lot in this book because she quite often very much subverts Caamp, and she seems to call out Caamp a lot. Anne does. Robinson has kind of some outdated takes, in my opinion, that don't take into account the nuance of being queer. You can be a queer woman and be in a relationship with a man and still be queer, and your queer identity is still valid. And it doesn't mean that you're falling for Caamp. Sometimes people fall in love with who they fall in love with. Maybe it's straight passing, but that doesn't take away from people's queerness. I do feel as if Robinson does bring up a lot of great points in this article, and I think it's a great read. I feel like Danica Ellis's analysis of the queerness in Anne of Green Gables aligns with my analysis the closest. Ellis also argues that Anne Shirley is bisexual while also acknowledging Robinson's article. As Ellis states, I can't help but read Anne as bisexual, and what an amazing character to add to the ranks of queer fictional icons. Oh, she wasn't written to be bisexual, but art grows up and it talks back to you. And I really love how Ellis says that. Just because maybe Montgomery didn't intentionally write these characters to be queer doesn't mean that they can't be. It's the death of the author. We don't know what Montgomery's real intentions were when writing Anne of Green Gables. Sure, we can go off of what she said and what was said about her and all of that, but also we aren't in her head. We don't know. And it's okay for us to analyze this text and to come to our own conclusions. And there is inherent queerness within this book. In conclusion, Anne of Green Gables is extremely queer. Anne and Diana are the original cottagecore queer women in a relationship, and Anne Shirley is a bisexual icon. Thank you so much for joining me in another literary analysis of Anne of Green Gables. I hope you all enjoyed my ramblings on how queer this story is, and I will see you in my next literary analysis.
When we were younger, we thought everyone was on our side. Then we grew a little and romanticized the time I saw flowers in your hair. 'Cause it takes a boy to live, it takes a man to pretend he was there. So then we grew a little and knew a lot, and now we demonstrated it to the cops, and all the things we said, we were self-assured. 'Cause it's a long road to wisdom, but it's a short one to being ignored. Be in my eyes, be in my heart, be in my eyes, I, be in my heart.